Hello, everybody. It's Saturday night at 10 o'clock. I'm Chris Weave. This is Starfleet Tactical. I have with me for the second week in a row, Alec Peters. Alec, I believe you were expressing a gripe to me.
Not doing 10 o'clock streams anywhere more. Because I was ready to go to bed. I was like,
oh, I totally get it. I totally get that. So for what it's worth, well, let me start off with, I'm not speaking for my employer, blah, blah, blah. You've all heard the standard caveat of 50 times or 150 times. So 151 times. This is our 151st show. Can you believe we're still doing this after 151 shows? Yeah. In any event, from last week, I asked everybody to take the poll, to let me know. If you did not, everybody who didn't do this last week, please put in the chat what time zone you're in and whether you would have a problem if we moved it up an hour or two. So I don't think I'm quite ready to go to the 7 o'clock that the rest of the Ares Studio shows are going to. But Alec points out that we started off at 10 o'clock, but everybody else has moved earlier. To be honest, the 10 o'clock time slot kind of screws up my entire Sunday, because usually about this time, I'm laying in bed trying to decide whether it's time to put on the CPAP and actually go to sleep or whether I'm going to be up for another 20 minutes. But when I do the show on Saturday night, usually I do not have this much energy at this time on a regular weeknight. But on Saturday night, at least in part, I get there by caffeinating all day, which means I frequently don't get to bed until 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. But that doesn't stop my body from waking me up at 5 a.m. And so, if we can move the time of the show, I'm in favor of moving it too. The thing is, I've got people in the central time zone that frequently come on the show, Chris Carlson and Pat Doyle in particular. And if we move it up too early, we run into their dinner time. And if we move it up a little bit, Pat will be able to participate more. If we move it up too much, he won't be able to participate because we'll run into dinner time. And Chris said essentially the same thing. So let me know. Right now, it looks like Eastern has more people in it than the other time zones, equal to the other time zones combined. And the only person who said that moving earlier would be a problem is my brother Delon.
He doesn't get any special consideration.
Yeah. So, but he said he could probably make it work. And the worst case scenarios, this is the reason why I tape stuff. This is the reason why, like when I run a war game conference, I could do it in Zoom or I could do it on YouTube. And the way I look at it is, if I do it on YouTube, you can always catch up later. So.
Yeah. So this, before we get to our BSG, this week I was cleaning out the garage and reorganizing stuff just because we had another load of cat food come in. So I knew I needed space, and I had to organize things because Crystal has to go through all of her crap and get rid of a bunch of stuff. So we're going through it all, and I'm pulling down some of my boxes. I'm trying to organize all my files together because I tend to be pretty detailed about that, all my taxes and the financials and everything. And I found my Star Trek autograph binder. Binders full of women, Star Trek women, which I've had. I was working on this 25 years easily, more than probably 30 years ago. I was working on it in the early 90s, and which was awesome because I knew I had some great autographs, including, I'll show you, but I went through my binder and I pulled out, I think I have 30 autograph photos that we're going to auction off for the animal rescue, including some really good stuff. But here's some of my favorites that I'm keeping. Here's Lee Merriweather from TOS.
Oh, yeah.
See her signature there. I am for you. It's great, right? Lee Merriweather.
That is not the outfit she wore when she was doing NFL football.
And then another one. If you'll remember from this is a great one from Menagerie. This is the lieutenant who was waiting for them on the planet. Sorry, it's
Okay.
Julie Parrish. And I will never forget, I got this Alza Carradine it was like the 93, 94 Grand Slam convention in Pasadena. This is before Creation was doing Las Vegas. And anyway, we went up and we both got autographs from her. So this is 93 and 94, which is what? 25, 26, 27 years after the Menagerie. Is probably 28 years after the Menagerie. Mm-hmm. So figure in this, she was probably in her mid to late 20s. So she's now, she's over 50 at this point when we saw her. And she was a knockout. And we both walked away from the table, and I was 34 at the time. And we were both like smitten and in love with her. She was so gorgeous. Then there was the big Star Trek Las Vegas convention that before Creation was doing it, was done by a guy named Dave Scott, who wound up going to jail. He was a criminal. But anyway, it was a big one. And there's 2001. It was the weekend before 9/11. So okay. It was Saturday, Sunday. Monday was my travel day. But one of this is literally the very first Star Trek autograph Alan Ruck ever signed. He was at that convention. He was setting up, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's Alan Ruck." I went up to him and I said, "Hey, I've never seen you at a convention before." He goes, "This is my very first Star Trek convention." And I said, "Well, I need your first autograph from your Star Trek convention." So that is going to get framed along with the love of my life, Robin Curtis as Saavik. Absolutely was crushing on her when that came out. And then some other great, and just one or two other great ones I'll show you. Dearly departed Mark Leonard. Yeah. I got his autograph and Ricardo Montalban. So yeah, I also have Joaquin. So anyway, I'm really excited. I pulled out all my duplicates or ones I really didn't care about, and I put them away there. And I'm gonna photograph them all or scan them all or whatever I do, and we're gonna do an auction just for the animal rescue.
That sounds fantastic.
And yeah, so anyway, there you go. That's it.
So a good friend of mine is the founder of the Klingon Language Institute, Lawrence Shun. And
who's that?
I'm sorry?
Who's that? Who's your friend?
Lawrence Shun.
Okay.
So not the creator, not Mark Okrand, who is the creator of Klingon, but the head of the Klingon Language Institute, he's a psychologist who now writes science fiction full time. Oh, and okay. So I've gotten to know him through various science fiction conventions, and he made the observation to me, what is Mark Leonard did first? What is the first that Mark Leonard did?
Well, he was the first Star Trek character to play more than one character.
That is true.
And he's the first one to play 3 different characters.
And he was the first one to speak Klingon.
Yeah, right.
On the big screen. So he was the first one to speak Klingon. And so he amongst the Klingon linguists out there, he's a standout because he's the first one to speak Klingon. I did ask Lawrence, how good is the Klingon in Star Trek Discovery? And he said it was pitch perfect.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'll give them props. I've got my issues with Discovery are well known, but the fact but they didn't muck up the Klingon. They got the Klingon right.
Well, that's good to know. Okay.
So that worked out well. So, okay. So I see a few people that are responding who responded last week. But the most important thing is like if moving earlier is like a showstopper for you, that's what I'd really like to hear. So if people are responding again that responded last week, that's okay. Now we'll probably end up doing it because so far It's been pretty overwhelming, and my guess is I'll wait a couple of episodes or something like that. It'll probably be, my guess is by the new year. My schedule gets a little bit wonky anyway towards the end of the year because of Christmas and Thanksgiving and all the rest of it. So
Pee-wee's at the door.
all right, you do that, and I'll do admin stuff.
Come on, buddy.
Okay, so let me go ahead and adjust this, make this a little smaller, because this is going to be more about Alec and I talking than the slides. The slides are really, in this episode, are just to sort of like give us topics to talk about. Okay, so here's the somewhat, I'm going to go ahead and let me make this bigger for this. This is the somewhat Chris-centric schedule. The important thing here is show next week, show the week after, then it's no for a couple of weeks. Then it's yes, and then it's looking like it's no again. Like I don't imagine I'm going to do one on the 28th of December. It's almost certainly a no, but there's certain circumstances where it might not be a no. There's a little bit of changes there, but the next couple of weeks I expect to do a show, and I expect the next 3 episodes, if Chris Carlson is available for all of them, we're going to be talking about Mike Bosworth and what's listed here as the carrier of large objects. Because what I have a tendency to do, the habit I've sort of fallen into with the show is I'll do something naval where I sort of talk about science. It's mostly about the naval stuff. And then I talk about science fiction in relation to the naval stuff. And then I'll go, okay, this is a science fiction show. I need to do something science fiction. So I'll do science fiction and then I'll reference the science fiction. I'll bring naval stuff into the science fiction. I kind of go back and forth that way. So the carriers of large objects thing was a set of papers written by a guy named Mike Bosworth, where he talked about some ideas for how to change the U.S. Navy fleet design, different types of ships aimed at making them producible, aimed at, and one of the types was what he called the carrier of large objects. And so that's how I sort of refer to it as. And it ties in really well with some of the littoral combat ship stuff that Chris Carlson and I did for a while, a few episodes ago. Because basically this is before LCS came out, but one of the things that they did is they really kind of designed something that sounds a lot like LCS, up to and including modular weapons fits that they put on board. The difference is they were going to deploy these things out of amphibs. And so they were going to use amphibs to carry surface vessels and the surface vessels will go off and engage in ASW and things like that. So we're going to talk about that, and Chris and I will sort of tie it into how to think about that in science fiction terms. So, once again, my opinion's not my employer's, and any of the artwork that I show tonight, we're going to critique the artwork. Most of it comes from Ralph McQuarrie and some of the excellent pre-production stuff he did for Battlestar Galactica. And so this is all about critiquing the artwork and using it for educational purposes. Okay, so we didn't get very far in the agenda last time because there was lots to talk about when it came to the actors and acting, but this is what I sort of want to go through tonight. We'll talk about ships and we'll talk about special effects and stuff like that, and then walk through the story. Now, I'm focused on Saga of the Star World.
Get out of there.
And you all may recall that the version that I saw this time is the theater release version, which, if I remember correctly, is 128 minutes, 125 minutes. It's not the 148-minute version that was the original broadcast premiere. So it's missing a few things, and there's a few things that are different. One of the big ones is that originally the Cylons were going to be aliens. ABC turned them into robots, not quite at the last moment, but fairly late in the process, because they were aiming for the kids show market, and it's okay to kill robots. It's not okay to kill aliens.
Unless the alien lobby get all upset.
Yeah, I mean, really, ABC? Really? I mean, and we see echoes of this later with Galactica 1980, where ABC didn't want to do the show, but the FCC said they needed more kids programming. Glenn Larson didn't do the show, but ABC said, if you don't do the show, I'll never buy anything from you again because we're getting this pressure from the FCC. Glenn Larson turned to Alan Cole and Chris Bunch and said, I want you to be the showrunners. And if you don't do the show, then I'll never buy a script from you again. And so nobody in the production staff wanted this show. They didn't want it. But ABC felt they had to do it because of the FCC. And when the ratings came in the garbage, their reaction was, thank God, now we've got an excuse to cancel it. Which makes me feel bad for the actors because it's not their fault.
Right.
Now, I will admit, I watched like one episode of Galactica 1980 and made my saving throw quite easily and never watched it again. But I'm told that one of the things in that show was human Cylons. Yeah. Yeah, apparently
I don't remember that show well enough.
They had Cylons that looked like humans. So I'm actually finding myself in a situation where I think I'm going to go watch it.
Won't kill you.
Well, probably not. Probably
it may be 60 minutes of your life you never get back.
Yeah. I also, one of the things I want to do is do a rewatch of Space Above and Beyond.
Oh yeah, we should. Yeah.
Which is a show that clearly had some flaws, but it had a lot of stuff that was actually pretty good. And one of the interesting things about it is, there were two antagonists in that show, two antagonist species. You had the Chigs, which were the aliens, and then you had the Silicates.
Oh, right.
And the Silicates look an awful lot like new BSG Cylons.
Yeah.
And so the more I think about that show, the more I sort of read up on that show again, the more I go like, it's sort of like the new Battlestar Galactica, but 10 years earlier in some ways. And there's other things I really like about that show too. Like you see some of what happens when you're fighting an enemy that you don't understand. Like
right.
One of the things, if we ever had to fight the Russians, we know what their fleet looks like. We know what their technology looks like, et cetera, et cetera. There'll be surprises, sure. But it's not like we've never encountered these guys before and we don't understand how their technology works.
Right.
So that's one of the things that, Starfleet's constantly running into people that they have no idea who they are or anything like that. You have to fight them. Whereas there are no recorded instances of a U.S. Navy carrier battle group discovering a new country that nobody had ever heard of before. It just doesn't happen. So.
How about when they went to Skull Island?
Not really a technological civilization. So, there's a lot of King Kong movies that I have to go watch. I'm way behind on my King Kong and my Godzilla. Okay, so we talked about actors and stuff last time. Let's talk about the ships. I love the ships in this show. I love the classic Battlestar. I think it's just fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely was the first good representation of the whole carrier in space thing.
Yeah, it really was. And the inside of the ship, there's some things I don't understand. Like, I don't understand why the bridge had to rotate, why that platform had to rotate. I understand kind of like why it was structured the way it is.
Yeah.
In fact, the U.S. Navy has adopted on a much smaller scale, but sort of a similar breakdown for combat information centers on the Arleigh Burkes. They've now sort of created an open area in front of the tactical action officer where they put the warfare officers in like a little pit in front of them, much smaller scale. But I don't understand why that platform had to rotate. Like, I don't understand what it got them. But I love that bridge. I absolutely love that bridge. And the inside of the ship had a very nautical feel to it. I mean, it really kind of looked like a World War II ship. So yeah, I loved everything about that ship. So I think Ralph McQuarrie did an excellent job in all of the concept artwork he did, especially with regard to the Galactica. And as we'll see, like when we get to I can't remember if we did the Viper one or not already, but like the Viper is like a pitch perfect. That's what they ended up going with. Now he also had some other interesting stuff for the Viper, like the ship that ended up being the Starfighter in Buck Rogers was originally a drawing done for Battlestar Galactica.
Right.
And there's another drawing that I've got later in here that I'd never seen before until last week when I went looking for artwork, that apparently was another proposal for the Viper, that also didn't make it, but I had never seen this one before. So the Buck Rogers stuff, I like those fighters, but it just wouldn't be the same without the Vipers looking the way they do. So
yeah, no, I think I loved all the designs, and I think, and ultimately they still relatively hold up over the years. Realistically, they didn't change them that much for the new Galactica.
No, they didn't. They really didn't. And I liked the new Galactica too. And the new Galactica had some nice stuff. Like I like how the alligator head sort of plugs in on the shipyards, in the fleet bases. It sort of plugs in. The fleet base that you see in Razor has the artwork for it shows that there's like little trains that are moving around. And they have areas where the track rotates so they can get to the underside, and so the train will flip over. And there's a lot of cool stuff. I like the new artwork too, or the new ship design too, but the old stuff is just classic. They did a really good job with that.
Yeah, and I'm not as crazy about the new Galactica. I love the new Pegasus. The new Galactica, not so much. But it also reinforces how the old Galactica just holds up so well. You need a better picture we need a good picture of the Galactica.
We got one coming up.
Okay.
One of the things that drove me nuts when I was a kid is I got the Battlestar Galactica monogram model kit. Oh my God, what a shitty model.
Yeah, I seem to remember that was a crappy model.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even accurate. The alligator head just isn't right. It's like it's not curved, it's sort of flat, and it's not long enough, and it's just like, what are you guys doing? You and it's got no detail on it, and it's just they phoned it in, and it's not even. I think it must have been like pre-production art. They did it based on pre-production art or something, but it's just garbage. I've got little miniatures that somebody did that are actually way better than the big monogram kit. Now, that having been said, I was the world's worst model builder. So I didn't improve it at all when I put it together. But yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on. Let's talk about the special effects. I love this painting. Doesn't that painting just really capture it?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great, and it's amazing how close to what they kind of went with it is. But yeah, no, I love his Galactica stuff. Yeah,
and I think the effects were really pretty good for a TV show in 1978. I don't think they were quite as good as Star Wars was.
No.
Despite the fact it was John Dykstra, and we see there's some churn that ended up happening in the effects department because John Dykstra left Industrial Light and Magic because they were moving from Van Nuys to someplace else. And the folks that didn't want to make the move with Industrial Light and Magic went and formed their own company. And apparently Dykstra took a bunch of equipment that had been left behind when the other guys moved out And then that was part of the lawsuit. Like, well, you're using our equipment, and the fact that they left it behind apparently wasn't good enough. So they gave him back the equipment. So John Dykstra does the special effects, but he and his team only do the special effects for Saga of a Star World, and then they're off the production. And they're good special effects, and they're so good that you get to see them each and every episode.
Yes.
You see the same shots repeated again and again.
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot of, I've noticed, it was especially true watching Saga of a Star World, that there's a lot of discontinuities between when you've got the picture inside the cockpit, the picture inside the cockpit looking out does not match what ends up happening when they come out of the cockpit. And you've got lots of things where they go, oh, he's going off to the left, and then the Cylon goes off to the right. There's just lots of places where it's like, okay, got it. You're just sort of randomly putting stuff together. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And remember that scene where there's two Vipers going after a Cylon, and the Cylon's down close to the Battlestar, and the one Viper shoots and blows it up, and the other one goes through the fireball?
Yeah.
You know what they told pilots in World War II?
What?
Under no circumstances go through the fireball.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. Yeah, that is not, it's great cinema, but it is very bad flying.
Yeah, because like ships don't vaporize, fighters don't vaporize. No. It's a minefield.
A debris field. It's a freaking huge debris field.
Yeah, and you know, even if it wasn't, you can't see.
I know.
For some period of time, you're blind, and you're very close. In that particular shot, they're very close to the ship. I mean, you've got two fighters maneuvering in close proximity to each other, and one of them, you know, disappears into this big bright flash, and that pilot can't see. So yeah, it looks good, but every time I see that shot, I cringe now. Oh, and the other thing is that there's a couple of shots where you've got Vipers firing down on raiders that are like right up against the Battlestar. What if you miss?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That doesn't make sense.
No.
But I need to go back and rewatch the entire series, because one of the things that I discovered in my research, you know, originally it was going to be a set of like 4 2-hour made for TV movies. It was basically going to be a couple of little mini series. And at some point they changed it to being like a regular TV show, and they had to come up with extra episodes. And so you've got these 2-parters that were the original high quality episodes, and then you've got some other ones that were kind of filler. And I need to go back and double check, because I think one of the comments that was made is that, like, yeah, you can tell which ones were filler just by the quality of the special effects. The special effects quality really went down. I need to go and take a look at that.
That doesn't surprise me.
Now, so in talking with Richard Hatch, did he talk about any of these things?
No, he I mean, never. Understand, you know, actors have a different experience than fans.
Yes.
Right? And so we never really talked about Galactica. He told me stories about getting the job, or working with Lorne, or working with Starbuck,
Dirk Benedict,
but never really about Galactica or the story, or much in that regards. You know, I always, especially being his friend, we talked about a lot of other things. A lot of times I was helping him on some business he was in, advising him on one or another. And I never felt the need to talk about Galactica with him, figuring he's probably sick and tired of talking about, you know. talking about like what he loved about it and why he wanted to bring it back and how he would bring it back and stuff like that we talked about. And as I mentioned last time, we did a big Galactica reunion in 1999. And it was with John Colicos and Richard Hatch and Dirk Benedict, Annie Lockhart, Jack Stauffer, and Herb Jefferson.
Okay.
And I'm sure there are plenty of stories there, but I honestly don't remember, any of them. That is 25 years ago. And but it was a lot of fun. I mean, the best story I have from that event was it was a big convention we put on in Pennsylvania. The best story was I guess it was Saturday night, the first night. It might have been Friday night, but we took everyone out to dinner, and whatever restaurant we went to, I just remember that we had a table set up that was basically looked like a barbell. There were two round tables, and they put a rectangular table in the middle. Mm-hmm. So we were all set, which wasn't a bad setup. And we were at one end, and it was like kind of like me, and I remember Richard and Dirk were there, and John Colicos and I were all in close proximity. If you know anything about Dirk likes being the center of attention. Let me just say that. And
that's no surprise.
Yeah, and so he was telling stories, and Richard, of course, loves talking. So Richard is funny because he loves talking, but it's never necessarily about him. I mean, he's mm-hmm. like he's a talker, but he's not narcissistic in any way. He was never that way anyway. So so those guys are loved. So for various reasons, those guys are dominating the conversation. But a couple of us are talking to John Colicos, and he's telling stories like when he was on the stage with Richard Burton, or he was just telling us stories about like the classic, the golden days of Hollywood and working TV or working in Mission Impossible or stuff, and I knew Richard, and at that point we had only been friends for maybe 6 years at that point. But John Colicos, we had never talked with John Colicos before. He wasn't someone who did a lot of shows. Mm-hmm. So we were just having a great time listening to John. He was so much fun, and he was very old Hollywood. And just an absolute pleasure, and just his stories of who he worked with. I mean, it was just fantastic. Now, sadly, that was his last convention. He passed away not long after, and that literally was the last convention he ever did. Hold on, Pee-wee. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons it was so important to find this book was the autographs I have, and here's my John Colicos. He signed this before he did the convention. He sent me this one of him as core. And it's ironic because another one that I got that I absolutely I'll just show you guys this, that was I got this years ago. I got this years ago. Aaron Eisenberg.
Oh.
And the funny thing is I own both those costumes. I own Aaron Nog's captain's costume from The Visitor, and I own Core's costume from Blood Oath. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's fun also because they were autographed to me, and I always tend to think autographs that are personalized are a lot of fun. So anyway, so there we go. So back to Richard. Yeah, we didn't talk much about that, and but I do think that we have the Galactica trailer on the on the website, on the Axanar YouTube page.
Okay.
Because I'm pretty sure I uploaded it. But anyway, go ahead.
It's fantastic. I got the impression that from what I've read and just sort of some other things that Richard took the job because it was a job and it was potentially a high profile job, and was originally reluctant to take it, but the script was good enough. But I never got the impression that he was much of a science fiction fan until he got into Galactica. Is that
Yes. Well, listen, he was a Star Trek fan from way back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was. He certainly became a Galactica fan, but no, he was a science fiction fan.
Okay.
When he was working back in the 70s, in the early 70s, doing Days of Our Lives, maybe it was, whichever someone can.
He did some soap, and I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, it was based in New York, and doing that, he was watching Star Trek every night at 6 o'clock on Channel 11 WPIX, like all of us were in the New York metro area. So he is absolutely a Star Trek fan.
One of the most interesting things I've encountered in the science fiction community is people that have absolutely no interest in science fiction whatsoever, except for Star Trek.
Yeah.
I've run into some people that are rabid Star Trek fans, and when you talk about any other science fiction, they could care less.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. I used to work with a guy who was that way, and it's like he just didn't, nope, just only Star Trek. He was a rabid Star Trek fan, didn't care about any of the rest of it. Okay. Not a bad thing. So
right.
Let's see. Let's go next slide. The soundtrack is largely fantastic, I thought. The main reason I put soundtrack in here is because there's this interesting thing with Stu Phillips on the one hand versus Bear McCreary is, I think it's McQuarrie, right?
Right.
On the other hand, because Bear's comment about Stu Phillips' work is, oh my God, it was so good. It was so good. And when somebody like shoved a microphone in front of Stu Phillips and said, what do you think about Bear's work? The answer was, yeah, he made some music. There were some notes there. He clearly was not a fan. But the new one was very eclectic and had a very interesting approach, and it worked for what they were trying to do. But I can understand why, if you were sort of approaching it from this big symphonic standpoint, I could easily understand why you'd like one and not like the other.
So. Sure. They're two different. And again, BSG, the original, it's 80s sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's very different. The new BSG was it was drama, right? You didn't have to be a science fiction fan to love it. It was great drama.
Yeah, you really didn't. It's sort of the history of soundtracks in film. Like if you go back to the early 1970s, there's some soundtracks for movies back then that are like unlistenable. They're just very experimental, all over the place, etc. That I don't think they fully meet the goal of sort of supporting the movie. But then again, I very clearly like the symphonic sort of approach to it. I like the John Williams approach to it, etc. So maybe this is a beauty is in the eye of the beholder sort of thing. So now Bob points out the idea of All Along the Watchtower is the name of the song you're looking for, Bob. The use of All Along the Watchtower as this common theme was an interesting idea. The only problem with it is that's clearly a song that they never heard, that we know what it was, right? I did kind of like that too, the idea that there's a song that they can hear that nobody else can hear. So, which is kind of nifty. Let's see. Let me go. Okay, so let's talk about Saga of the Star World, and these are just, I broke it down into about 6 sections, I think it is, and just sort of some observations that I made when I was going through it. So, we start off with the fleet making this grand entrance. I mean, that's one of the cool things we see is after you've got this Nebula and Patrick McNee talking about the Toltecs and the Mayans and the Egyptians and stuff like that. And then the next thing you see is the fleet. And that was a good way to start off. But as it moves forward, I just remember thinking, for people that have been fighting for 1,000 years, they really kind of seem lax and gullible. And they didn't really feel like people that have been fighting for 1,000 years. They felt like people that had gotten pulled into, like maybe they had a skirmish or two and they were hoping that they could still prevent a war from happening. They didn't feel like people that had been fighting for 1,000 years. I like the fact that Dirk Benedict at one point, Starbuck at one point says, I have a funny feeling. I think it was Starbuck. Oh, it might have been Zach. I have a funny feeling about this. No, I think it was Dirk Benedict because, of course, he's in, if you have to assign sort of an archetypal role, he was in the Han Solo role. And right. So he quotes Han Solo. And, they do some jamming early on. And I remember thinking, like, why did they even bother jamming? Because nobody in the fleet knows how to use a radio anyway. They don't radio back home to the colonies. Apollo does not radio when he's like doing control stuff, like landing control stuff, but he doesn't say, hey, by the way, there's Cylons coming.
Right.
Or by the way, he doesn't give a report. He waits until he gets up on the bridge. Now, some of this, like not radioing the colonies, I think I remember that there's something it's at least in the novel, if I remember correctly, and I think it might have been in the original telecast, that there was something to the effect of when Serena's there reporting, she says something like we don't have word yet because we're having trouble establishing communications with the fleet, but things should be, progressing at this point. So maybe there was some jamming in there, but there's lots of places where people should get on a radio and give a report, and they never do.
Yeah. Hey, hold on once. You keep going. Pee-wee here seems to want to get down, so I'm going to take him inside for a second.
Okay, I'll keep going.
You keep going. All right, buddy.
Okay, so the next scene we have is assembling the fleet. And the attack on Capricorn, assembling the fleet. And the thing that sort of baffles me about this is that like really you've got 12 battle stars and that's it. You don't have any forts, you don't have any local defenses, you don't have any interception zones, you don't have any of this other stuff. You're fighting a war and you've only got 12 ships and that's it. There's no other, you don't have any radars, you don't have any sensors telling you there's an attack. That part was sort of problematic, that there's no independent defenses other than the fleet. But I did really like the scene where Starbuck is having problems and Athena's on the radio to him. I guess Starbuck knows how to use a radio. Apollo doesn't. She's on the radio to him, like troubleshooting the Viper, like flip the, turn this circuit breaker, do X, do Y, do Z. I thought that was actually kind of cool. That was a nifty idea. And then when they go down, when Apollo takes him down to the surface, where exactly was Adama sitting? Like, was he sitting on Apollo's lap? Because there's not any extra room in that ship.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah. Okay, so then you've got all the traveling off to Carillon, and you've got all the issues that go along with it. There's food shortages, there's food contamination, you got lots of politics rearing its ugly head. But I remember thinking, like, okay, if there's humans on Carillon, why wouldn't they think that Carillon would be a target, right? Wouldn't it be weird that Carillon wasn't a target? And oh, by the way, remember when they're standing in front of that nice big glass map with stuff on it? Isn't that like the worst map ever?
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. It's like, what does this mean?
Yeah, it's like you can actually use it's more like a piece of art than it is a map.
Yeah, it was something made up by the art department to look futuristic. Give us like a futuristic map.
Yeah, and you know, people are pointing to it like, well, you know, we'll go this way, and it's like, what are you doing? So, I remember in the scene with Starbuck and Cassiopeia, where like she goes off to get a room, and he says, "Oh Lord, I'll do anything you ask tomorrow." And this time when I watched it, I remember thinking, who exactly is he praying to?
Which god is he praying to?
Yeah, like because
they're polytheists.
I'm trying to remember if we got much of an insight into what the religion looked like in the original show. There's clearly a lot of religious symbolism in the show, and I'm told that if you're Mormon, a lot of stuff looks really familiar.
Well, yeah, I mean, they talk about the gods of Kobol.
Yeah, I guess they do talk about the gods of Kobol. So it's like, okay, so yeah. So it's not, I think that's a case, and every now and then you'll see this. I think there's in the regular Battlestar Galactica, there's another place where Ty says something. Ty says something, if I remember correctly, where it's like, yeah, that doesn't work. Somebody says something like Jesus Christ or something like that. It's like, that's interesting. How'd that get in there? The minefield stuff, minefields in science fiction are always done kind of wonkily in this idea that you'd like, how did the ship be able to give them coordinates on how to shoot the mines that they couldn't get themselves? I just don't understand that. I just don't understand it.
And yeah, I think what you have to also understand is that when they're in 78, when 77, 78, when they're making this, science fiction is still rooted in the 60s.
Yes, very much so.
There's no significant, I mean, tell me, is there any significant science fiction? I mean, realistically, the significant science fiction is coming out of England. It's UFO and Space 1999 is yeah. I mean, you can look at, in a way, Space 1999, which was a contemporary of Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, it predates it. It was like 75, 76.
Was that when it was?
Yeah.
Is more sophisticated than Galactica.
Yeah.
In a way, Galactica, the science fiction is just like, it's like the setting. It's
the flavor. It's the flavor.
It is. It's not the story. The story is meant to be about humanity.
One Horse Shay says Ty saying Jesus was an ad lib. Now I don't know if he knows that or he's guessing. But
where does Ty? Is this in the original?
No, in the miniseries. For the new Battlestar Galactica, Ty at one point says Jesus.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
I want to say that I think he's in Adama's quarters talking to Adama, if I remember correctly.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if Michael Hogan didn't just ad lib that and they.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Yeah. There was a lot of interesting ad libs in that show, like the entire Edward James Olmos repeating "So say we all" and making them say it again. He just did it, and in a room full of people went with him.
Yeah,
and so that was fantastic. Yeah. So okay, so then here's that fighter I talked about. I had never seen that artwork before, and there's
that's interesting.
There's pictures of it from a couple of different angles. Like there's one that's
it's awful. It's too long.
It's interesting. It looks more Traveler like than it does either Star Wars or Battlestar Galactica like. It looks more like the role playing game Traveler. But it was an interesting design that I'd never seen before. I thought the entire bit on Carillon was the weakest part of the movie, for a couple of different reasons. I didn't think that it didn't. A lot of it just I didn't think held together. Like you've got this Ty and Adama come up with this plan, and they don't bother telling Apollo and Starbuck and Boomer what the plan is, that they're going to put guys in fake uniforms, and have other people wear their uniforms but if you're going to pretend to have 100 warriors there, that means that there's at least 100 people that are in the plan. And, you would expect that Apollo and those guys would see it and go, this isn't right.
Right.
Yeah. Never create a plan that a well-meaning paranoid person could ruin just by asking the wrong question at the wrong time.
Right.
And all they needed to do was say, oh, by the way, there's a plan. You're going to see a bunch of people you don't recognize. It's okay. Roll with it. Okay, then. Roger that, boss. Got it. So they also have something called a languatron that does a translation.
Okay.
So universal translator, I think, is much better way of saying that. But they've got their own universal translator. Okay. So that is one of my all-time favorite views of the Galactica. And whenever I see that, doesn't it look like the ship is angry?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly.
That's a ship that means business.
Yeah, no, it's a great shot. It is a great shot.
I love that shot. But during this entire thing, it's like a couple of stray blaster bolts can set an entire planet on fire. This strikes me as problematic for a bunch of reasons. Now, admittedly, the ship, the Cylon base star crashing into the planet and sort of having the lightning static discharge, etc., is what really set the planet off. But they're clearly worried about it. They clearly saying, oh, with all this thallium here, the entire planet may blow up. And it's like, that's how this works. And I think this was just a case of Star Wars envy. They had to blow up a planet. And so even 13-year-old me thought that this was kind of a lame way to end it. And it really kind of deserved better. There needed to be a cool space battle, and it just wasn't as cool as it could have been. But even by that point, it's like we saw the same Viper come down and do the little roll and fire, and we saw the same, we've seen the same shot of the Cylon being blown up and the other guy flying through the debris cloud, and we had already seen that like 3 times by the time the episode ended, and it's still the very first episode. So in some ways, this sort of set the stage for the season that was to come. To be honest, by the end of the show, I wasn't, even though, I was the audience, I was a 13-year-old at the time. By the end of the first season, I was kind of like, yeah, this show isn't doing it for me anymore, which is a shame. Because, that's such a fantastic shot. There needed to be more of that. And less of the damn Daggett.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonder whatever happened to the chimp in that suit.
Well, he wasn't signing autographs at any shows.
Okay, so then we have a space battle and a lot of repeat shots, like I said. I did like when they're reporting to Imperious Leader, and there was like, I thought this was supposed to be a surprise, and apparently it was not as big a surprise as we had hoped. It would have been interesting if there had been some speculation about exactly how much of the Cylon's Tylium supply they had blown up when they blew up the planet, because it sounded like the entire planet was just made of this stuff. And so that, this is like the equivalent of blowing up the Saudi oil fields.
Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah. I love the Ralph McQuarrie art.
Yeah, that is also another fantastic.
Yeah, just really dynamic.
Yeah, that is such a great shot. I really love that. So, and I think, yeah, that was the last one. That's the opening shot where you see the fleet coming in.
Right.
And that's just a beautiful shot too. One of the things, I mean, they clearly just used the same model and composited it. One of the things that came across in the novel, though, is that all those battle stars were not the same in the novel. The Pacifica, for instance, was bigger than the other battle stars, and they don't really explain why it was or anything like that. But there was clearly some differentiation that you don't actually see in the TV show.
Right, which they follow through in, obviously, in the new Battlestar.
Yeah, they do. The new Battlestar had a lot of good stuff. I liked Razor. I liked Blood and Chrome, although Blood and Chrome occasionally, there was a few places where it was kind of a parody of itself. Like the guy surviving on the planet was kind of a parody of a guy surviving on a planet. He was a little over the top, and Cylons make good eating. The snake makes good eating, that sort of stuff. But I generally liked Blood and Chrome. And I generally liked Razor. And the rest of the show was generally okay, although I need to go back. I remember having the idea when I was watching it in real time. There was lots of places where it's like, okay, where are they going to go next? And I didn't always agree with where they went next. And I remember thinking that I wanted to rewatch the show and sort of keep a log and go, okay, at this point with what we know now, where would I go if I were in charge? That's probably more work than I'm ever going to be willing to put in, though. The plan, I just remember the plan being horrible. Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, the plan, which is, that's when we were up on set for the shooting of that. The plan is, it's basically trying to tie in a lot. It's a lot of flashbacks, trying to tie in a lot of things that happened. And it's what is it like? It's just like that episode that they do that is meant to be like a filler, right? It's like, oh, let's do a flashback episode and just use all stock footage.
Yeah, a clip episode, a clip show.
Yeah, it was, they had all the actors and they were just telling a story that wasn't particularly compelling.
Yeah, it's, so strangely enough, I've never seen Lost. I also was not an X-Files person. I should have been, and I would have been, except that X-Files, the time of X-Files was right after my divorce. And I just didn't watch television. I went home every day for 2 years and just laid on my couch and read a novel. That's how I coped with all that. And so there was a time period there, and then I didn't have cable for a long time. And so there was a time period there where like I just didn't do television. And so I was never the X-Files fan that I should have been. But one of the things that became apparent from both those shows, from just, all the stuff reading I did, is They were both shows that wanted the audience to believe that there was this master plan, but they were really only thinking about it about 2 episodes ahead, if that. And I think that that was the same case with Battlestar Galactica. I don't think that they had, I think the first time that the plan got written down was when they wrote the script for the plan. And the way I always describe it is the Cylons have a plan, and it turns out it was really dumb.
Yeah, right. Right.
So Logic's Finest says, Pacifica, I thought Atlantia was the flagship. Atlantia was the flagship, but in the novel, Pacifica is one of the other battleships that is at the Holocaust. So, but Atlantia was the flagship. So yeah, I mean, I have, I really, really like the new episode, the new Battlestar Galactica. Overall, I think the new show was better drama. I think I like the feel of the old show. I think both are flawed. Let's see. This is interesting. Ron Moore is on record as saying that he thinks the tagline, "They have a plan," was a mistake, and that he regretted using it. It says in his next thing that he regretted using it.
Yeah, I can believe that. Yeah, because what was the plan? Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that. And also, Ron Moore after season 3 wanted 2 more seasons to wrap it up, and they wouldn't give him 2 more seasons. Bonnie, what's her name, the one who was in charge of Sci-Fi Channel at the time, would only give them 1 season. So it's like, well, I'm not going to leave a cliffhanger for the fans. If you can't give me the 2 seasons to wrap this story up, I'm going to wrap it up in 1. And that's what they did.
This is why everybody should buy lottery tickets and send them to me. Because if I win a big lottery, I know exactly what I'm like. If I won, one of these insane ones, I won $800 million. I know exactly what I would do. One of my vanity project would be is I would take the Exordium series, which way before anybody had heard of the new Battlestar Galactica, I was saying they should take this 5-book series, and they had heard of Game of Thrones. That's what I meant to say. They should take this 5-book series and do every book would be a season. And I would find a bunch of actors and say, here's the deal. I'm going to pay you all a shit ton of money. And we're going to do this. We're going to film the whole thing. And if somebody picks it up, if somebody wants to broadcast it afterwards, that's great. Somebody will do it because I'll make them an offer they can't refuse. But it's going to be, we're going to do 5 seasons. And I don't care whether Sci-Fi Channel, whether that's what you want to pay for, because you're not paying for it, I'm paying for it. Bonnie, what's her name? I forget what her name was. And if I remember correctly, she got fired.
After Sci-Fi, she got promoted to be in charge of USA Networks.
Did she get fired from that though? Or am I
don't
wishful thinking on my part?
Yeah, I don't quite remember.
She was on record as saying that basically, I mean, she's the one who brought in all the wrestling and other bullshit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because she was one of these people that had utter contempt for science fiction fans. Utter contempt. And basically said, yeah, we can't really do a network based upon the thing that we said we were going to do a network on. And so we should move to do the network. We should turn it into something else.
Right, which is utterly ridiculous. I mean, having wrestling on Sci-Fi Channel is just such a slap in the face to sci-fi fans.
Yeah, and for the record, I got nothing against professional wrestling. It's interesting drama in its own sort of way. It was always interesting sort of figuring out what the writers were going to do the next week with it. I sort of viewed it as being a very, very weird soap opera. And I will also say those people are athletes in the same way that a stuntman is an athlete, because you can't do the shit that they do and not be an athlete and not kill yourself in the process. And so, it's not a competition in the same way that, like, a football game is, but they are athletic in the same way that, say, like an acrobat is, right? Acrobats don't do competitions, right? So it was closer to being the circus than it was to being a sporting event. But yeah, I don't understand why it was on the Sci-Fi Channel, and Sci-Fi Channel did some good stuff, but it wasn't because of her.
Right.
One Horse Shay says a friend of a friend had to switch to MMA from wrestling because it was safer. That actually doesn't surprise me at all. Because there's a lot of stuff there. So for what it's worth, everybody, if you want to get some interesting reading, go to Wikipedia and look up professional wrestling in Wikipedia. Because at least the last time I was there was some hardcore wrestling nerds that had gone through and did this incredible write-up of, like, all the vocabulary, because there's specific term. Like, there's a term to describe the situation where somebody is supposed to lose and they're not playing along.
Oh, okay.
And the way it usually happens is somebody, like, throws a punch or whatever that the other person is supposed to act like it's a big deal, and they just sort of shrug it off, and it's like, oh shit. Now we've got to deal with the fact that this person isn't following the script, and everybody's roided up, so everybody's touchy. And so now there's the possibility of like people can really get hurt because those guys are really that strong. And so apparently there's like a specific term for that. It's really interesting. It's really interesting. So let's see. Let me do a really quick scan. I've been sort of looking along and sort of responding to stuff as I saw it. Yeah, Wright said something about Gun on Ice Planet Zero. That was one of the ones that was intended as being a two-parter miniseries thing. So that one like had a real script to it. Yeah, that model did kind of look like an F-106 Thunder Chief.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not seeing anything that I need to jump on. So I think actually we have met our criteria. We can declare victory.
All right.
And I can let the old guy go sleep.
Yes, please.
Now, for the record, Alec is older than me, but not by much. He's got a couple years on me, but only a couple.
Yeah. Well, today I was watching videos about Medicare. Like, you got to be prepared for what you have to do for Medicare. So
yeah.
Next year is my Medicare year.
I've been thinking about all that stuff too, because I discovered somewhat. I have no intent on retiring anytime soon, but I do become eligible for federal retirement in April.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not ready to retire for a whole bunch of different reasons. But a friend of mine was, when he became eligible for his second retirement, because he retired from the National Guard, he was full active duty National Guard his entire career. He retired from that. Then he went to MITRE, and he retired, and he got to be retirement eligible at MITRE. And somebody made the observation to him, "You're one bad meeting away from retiring." The bad meeting happened on a Friday. On Sunday, he had to give two pay periods notice. Pay period started on Monday. On Sunday, he sent a note to his boss saying, I'm taking 19 days of leave. I'll be on the 20th day to sign my paperwork to leave.
Oh, wow.
That's how he retired. So.
Pee-wee.
All right. So do you have any final thoughts before we declare victory?
Listen, it's Battlestar Galactica is a great show.
Yeah.
As much as it was flawed, it also had some great stuff.
Yes.
And certainly the ship design was one. I would argue the cast was another.
Yes.
And although it's kind of mediocre 70s sci-fi, there's a lot of good stuff from it. And the fact that they dealt with things like the afterlife and good versus evil and some stuff, I thought there were some good episodes there when Count Ibley came back and such. So yeah, and it spawned the greatest sci-fi show of all time, the Ron Moore version.
Second best sci-fi show.
Which do you think is first?
TNG.
I would argue that to the day I die.
Yeah, I
TNG,
know.
TNG may be the most popular, but those first two seasons just kill it for me.
Oh, yeah, it's best not to talk about the first two seasons. But I think, I'm on record as saying, and I'll say it again, I think the best thing to ever come out of the franchise is Yesterday's Enterprise. I
can't disagree with that. It's probably
my rule of thumb is when a Star Trek movie comes on cable or something like that, I ask myself, would I rather watch this movie or would I rather watch Yesterday's Enterprise twice?
Exactly. Yeah, it is one of those. But it's interesting, and we talked about this before. Just to wrap up, is when I was being asked, recently about the best episode of Star Trek, and I said I can't give you a best episode of Star Trek. I can give you my favorite episode, of Star Trek from like TOS would be Doomsday Machine. I think is the perfect Star Trek episode. Next Gen, it's clearly Yesterday's Enterprise. As good as Inner Light is a very personal story about Picard. So it's not a big enough episode. It's a very small, intimate episode. Great, right? Great. I put it right behind, and then In the Pale Moonlight. And when you look at those three episodes, this Voyager, I don't know, I don't care, and Enterprise same way. There were some good episodes, but when if you look at Star Trek, and if you put Doomsday Machine and Yesterday's Enterprise and In the Pale Moonlight, and these are the three best episodes of Star Trek. It's really some of the best TV ever. Those three, and they deal with really, I think Doomsday Machine is like classic action suspense. Yesterday's Enterprise really involves high science fiction, consequences of time travel, and some fucking brilliant acting by Patrick Stewart and Whoopi Goldberg. And then,
and my favorite scene in that episode is when Tasha Yar goes and asks for a transfer.
Oh, whoa, that's I know, right? That is.
Yeah. I knew the risks that came with a Starfleet uniform. If I'm to die in one, I want it to make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. That's
a fitting epithet to put on a tombstone.
Yep, absolutely.
So in addition to Inner Light, so my three favorite Next Gen episodes are, you covered two of them. The third one is actually Darmok.
Yeah, it's a very classic episode, and it's very Star Trek. It's very science fiction-y. Gene Roddenberry would have been very proud of that episode.
Yeah.
Right? You could easily see that episode being a TOS episode, right?
Yes.
Easily see it.
And, it's an episode that my first reaction to it was, it's a great emotional episode, but it doesn't make sense. But the more I think about it, the more it actually makes sense on a logical basis, because language and communication are related to each other, but they are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that was an episode about the difference between language and communication. And since we have become a society that speaks to each other in memes, Basically that was a society that spoke to each other. They spoke in memes as on a daily basis, and that's how they communicated with each other.
Yeah.
And they're trying to talk to somebody who doesn't speak that way. And
Right.
it's really more about how, the cultural baggage goes along with it, right? And you have to understand sort of the cultural baggage in order to be able to translate. And that last scene in that, where Riker comes in and talks to Picard, and Picard says that he's rereading some of the classic myths, and that, when push came to shove, that captain was so determined that they needed to communicate that he was willing to risk his own life just to talk to somebody. It's like, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And for me, my third favorite episode is Tapestry.
Which one is Tapestry?
Tapestry is the one where Q lets Picard go back and relive his youth, which he always has regretted in the show, right?
Yeah, the one where he doesn't get the blast to the heart or whatever it was.
Right, and his life takes a very different turn because he doesn't learn an important life lesson about taking risks and being brash and yeah. And that episode is so good just because it taught me a lot. It just about reconciling my life with where I was in life, and also the realization, the change in the character of Picard in that episode is really profound.
Yeah,
and I think that, and which reinforces the story, but it's also the episode in which you see Q in a different light. He's no longer an antagonist to Picard.
Q had there was some tough love there, for lack of a better term. So, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of one of my favorite scenes from Enterprise, which Enterprise had some really good stuff in it too. Some people refuse to believe that, but I'll stand by that statement. And one of them is the episode where at one point, I forget what episode it was, but Trip is working with Soval. Trip is working with Soval about something, and Trip says, just sort of as he's programming whatever, he says, "Can I ask you a question?" Soval says, "Yeah." Said, "Why are you doing this? You don't really seem to like humans." And he said, what he said was, "Well, then I did my job in not letting you realize that I really like you guys." Because and he says something to the effect of, "No, really, I'm your biggest fan. That's why I'm here." That's why I volunteered for this job. So one of the things I really liked about Enterprise is that the Vulcans sort of come off before Enterprise as being sort of goody two-shoes.
Right.
Enterprise does a really good job of showing they're just as Machiavellian as everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was part of my hypothesis. I came up with the conclusion that most of the fans don't understand Vulcan logic, in that they don't understand the purpose of it. That, Spock used to say stuff all the time like it was the most logical thing in the world, and I'd go like, that doesn't make any sense. Like that just doesn't make any sense. And I realized at some point that the purpose of Vulcan logic is not to be precise. It's not to make good decisions. The purpose of Vulcan logic is to restrain the emotions that would otherwise destroy them. And so I think, as part of, the Federation puts up with some shit from a lot of people, right? Like the Klingons basically have slaves, and we're okay with that. The Federation's okay with that because, hey, non-interference. We have an alliance with these people that all the background material says, oh yeah, they have slave races all over the place. And so I think that basically the common ethos in Starfleet, at least, is like, Yeah, just humor the Vulcan. It would be impolite to point out that his logic is garbage. Just that's his thing, right? You know, that guy eats funny food. That guy pretends he has logic. Just roll with it. Don't insult him by pointing it out. It's sort of like dealing with the Japanese. I was in a situation once where literally, like, there was an American of Japanese descent who was functioning as a translator. And there's a bunch of Japanese officers there and a bunch of American officers. And an American asked a question, and the American translator started translating it, and the Japanese translator interrupted him and took it over. And it's like he interrupted him. Think about that for a second. And so afterwards, after everybody else had left the room, I went up to talk to the American translator and who was a former SEAL, and then the Marine Corps major who was the other person involved in all this. And I said, Aki, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, what was that with him interrupting you? And he just laughed and he said, oh, he wanted to put some spin on it. And I said, well, was it an accurate translation? He said, oh, yeah, it was accurate. But what he said was, the Americans just asked a question about such and such. We are not going to have that conversation with the Americans. So if they ask, do not say anything to them about it. And I said, you're standing right next to him and you speak Japanese. And there's other Americans in the room that speak Japanese. And Aki's response was, yes, and that would be impolite for me to point that out.
That's interesting.
So they just all pretended that none of the Americans could understand that. And so I think that's the way the Federation handles the Vulcans, is they just pretend that it makes sense. So I think that's probably a good place to stop for this evening.
I think so. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for showing up.
Thank you very much. And I will go ahead and take us out in just a moment. But remember, show next week and show the week after that, and then no shows for a while. And hopefully, Chris Carlson has said that he's available next week. I want to be able to confirm that. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good weekend. And as always, I am honored by the fact that all of you are willing to come and spend your Saturday night listening to me talk.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alec, for being on the show.
My pleasure.
See you all soon.
Everyone.